Welcome to the September 1st live question and answer session for the Cameron Peak Fire. My name is Dawn Sanchez. I'm a Public Information Officer with Rocky Mountain Team Black. Thank you for joining us tonight. Purpose of today's informal chat is to allow you to ask questions about evacuations and closures in regards to the Cameron Peak Fire. The way this will work is that we'll get an overview of the recent fire behavior from Boyd Labita, who is our fire behavior analyst. And then we'll go into a question and answer session with Katie Donahue from the U.S. Forest Service, Darla Seidels from the Rocky Mountain National Park, and Sheriff Justin Smith from the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. And they will be supported by our fire behavior analyst, Boyd Labita. You can type your questions in the comments section of the feed, then I'll summarize the question and I'll ask them of our speakers. You will not see me on camera, but you'll hear my voice. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the hour, but I'm going to try to combine some questions to try to get through some of the questions through that hour. If we get very specific questions, like fire operations or a fire location, or questions that will be better answered by another agency or a person in a different functional area, they'll be noted and we'll answer them after the session's over. Now I'd like to have our speakers introduce themselves, speak a little bit about their role on the Cameron Peak Fire, and where their agency is today with closures and evacuations, along with any anticipated changes in the future.
My name's Katie Donahue. I'm the Canyon Lakes District Ranger on the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forests and Pawnee National Grassland. And I'm the Forest Service Agency Administrator for this fire, which means my role is to work with the teams that come in to manage the fire, to help make decisions that help protect our local resources on the National Forest.
Good evening, I'm Darla Seidels, and I'm the Superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park, and I am the Agency Administrator for Rocky. So same role as Katie, but on the National Park Service side.
Good evening, I'm Justin Smith, Larimer County Sheriff, and because this fire is primarily on federal lands, we're not involved directly in the firefighting operations this time. Our responsibilities on this fire primarily are your safety, firefighter safety, and the safety of your homes, your cabins, your businesses, and your properties.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Boyd Labita for an update on fire behavior.
Good evening, I'm Boyd Labita, a fire behavior analyst for Rocky Mountain Team Black. Appreciate the opportunity to speak and represent what's going on with the fire. So this fire is in a place that hasn't seen fire in some time. These high elevation forests, fire is a relatively infrequent occurrence there. It is a natural phenomenon, but it's got some complexities with it because of the place that it's in. The first among those is the fuels. It's high elevation spruce and fir forest, very dense, just naturally occurring, and that's the way it grows. Yet a couple of things have affected it over the recent history. One of them would be the mountain pine beetle outbreak we had over the last couple of decades. So the lodgepole component of that forest suffered significant mortality and now is still in there, but it's a dead component of that forest. In addition to that, we've had a spruce beetle outbreak over that time as well, and likewise we have a component of spruce. So we've got this thick forest, we've got a pretty significant component of dead, and as you know, that's flammable, especially in a drought era. Northern Colorado actually didn't have too severe of a drought in the first half of the year, even the first half of the summer, but about since middle of July, early July, it has been dry. We had a very weak monsoon, and it got really hot under this high pressure, and that has dried everything out drastically. We're in a severe drought in northern Colorado at this time, and that has had a large effect on how this fire behaved. The topography that this sits on is very complex. It's at one of the high prominent points on the Northern Front Range. Numerous rivers have their headwaters in that area. The Colorado, the Michigan, the Laramie, the Poudre are there. And the Big Thompson isn't far to the southeast of there. So the way the wind moves and the weather moves is complex, and that makes the wind variable, blows from very different directions at times and can be strong because it's such high elevation. So very challenging place to have a fire occur on. The way this fire has behaved and moved because of that drought and because of the where it's at, it's what we would call fuels driven. And that just means there's so much fuel, and the intensity it burns with catches fire to the adjacent fuel. It can burn at times where then it's not wind driven or not needing a steep slope to go up. So it's moved some places that fires that we've seen at lower elevations and other places in the county just haven't moved. Let's see. When this fire started a couple of weeks ago, started on Cameron Peak, of course, and moved off of there, moved in a downhill direction. During that time, we had that really, really hot weather. You remember that. It was dry, and we had some winds up there. This fuel loading is so heavy, it's tremendously smoky, produces lots of intensity, and you guys lived all through that, breathing that smoke. So we had movement for a number of days coming off Cameron Peak, crossed over the north part of Chambers Lake, moved down into the Laramie River, and then because of that topography, had a wind direction change and pushed it back to the south. So that's when it crossed over near Joe Wright and began to push that way and up towards the Long Draw area. So difficult firefighting circumstances, and just gets moved around that way. Then about last weekend, we had a pattern change. So we kind of got a break from that real hot weather, and it moderated. And since then, the fire has largely kind of stayed put. So our air cleaned up, the fire has kind of stayed put, but yet now, starting tomorrow, we're going back into that high pressure pattern. So it's going to get hot again. We're going to begin to dry out those fuels, and it's just setting itself up for another potential movement on this fire. So that's kind of a bigger picture. Where it's at today, though, is most of the perimeter is relatively mild conditions right there. The places we've got some heat would primarily be on the east side of it. A spot south of Sleeping Elephant Mountain, we see some smoke. South along the Zimmerman Trail and the South Fork of the Poudre, there's some places of heat. Peterson Lake, and then just west of Joe Wright Reservoir, there's some places of heat. So currently, it's been staying put. Even tomorrow, we expect it to kind of stay put, but we're returning to that pattern of very hot weather, and we expect fire activity to increase as we get towards the weekend.
Okay, we'll start our first question. And I believe this is going to be for you, Sheriff. These are regarding to credentials, and we'll have several questions so far with credentials. So the first part of this is, if we missed the day that we set by the county, if we miss getting credentials, how do you get them? And if somebody applied online, they didn't get anything, how do they get in?
Thank you, very good question. And let me just address a little bit on how credentialing has changed and how we're operating this time. On previous fires, we waited until after individuals are evacuated in large groups and then had them trying to get back to get credentialing. This time we actually got ahead of it, as most citizens are aware that they're able to get that ahead of time before there's any evacuation. We've had several different sites, but this week, August 31st through September 4th, at Cache La Poudre Middle School, they're continuing to do credentialing for individuals, and what we ask them to do is to bring in their ID, driver's license, registration on their vehicle, something that shows an address up in that fire area. If that's not a primary address, if it's a secondary, if they can have something with a utility bill, etc. If that's not available, personnel there will work to look through property records, etc. But you can go through CLP to find that. The best way to get information on what's going on from the county end when you deal with evacuations or credentialing is going to be to go to larimer.org, the main landing site for the county. just look at the top banner of any county page, and there'll be a link for the fire, and that will give more specifics as to the hours and a reminder of what paperwork to bring to get those credentials.
Okay, so if folks are located out of state, they can get credentials online.
Yes, we recognize that there are individuals who are out of state, either need to get them for them, or we do understand that some of the individuals who are property owners will have family or friends in the area, and if they'll follow the links in there and should be able to make a phone call in, explain the situation, we'll work with them to get those credentials for the person who can get to the property, because we recognize that further out as this fire goes on, you may want to at least get somebody in there to take care of certain valuables or clean up the property, etc.
Okay, excellent. So this one, it does involve the U.S. Forest Service. Do the credentials issued by Larimer County allow property owners to be on National Forest land if their property is located on Forest Service land once the county allows the property owner to access the property?
We're working really closely with Larimer County on those situations. So yes, people will be allowed back into their property if they've been permitted to do so by the sheriff. However, that's not a free pass to go out and recreate within the closure area. And so what we're really focused on is providing that opportunity for people who need to be with their property and need to be back in their own buildings and structures, but they can't be in there for the purpose of recreation.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is, anytime in the foreseeable future, can you open Cameron Pass to traffic?
As far as the roads coming through, everything's going to be determined by fire behavior and what the conditions are for firefighters in the area. I personally don't anticipate that's likely to open anytime in the near future, because there are a lot of fire operations active through there. And one of the things that I'll help to explain is it may not always be simply because there's fire right on the road, but there may be a lot of fire vehicles coming and going. Oftentimes we have patrols working up and down those roads. So at this point in time, for both reasons of fire in the area that still threatens those, heavy smoke, and fire personnel, that road is not open, and we don't anticipate that likely to open, unfortunately, for some period of time.
Thank you. The next question has to do with homeowners getting back into the property. Are you allowing people to get back in to get items such as vehicles or things like medication?
Very good question. Where we're at right now, and let me just back up and say that we started out with some broad evacuation zones in the first days after the fire began because it was a very fast-growing fire, grew exponentially, and had a quick threat on different areas. As of last Sunday, we were able to dial back a little bit on some of those mandatory evacuation areas and get individuals back into their homes under either completely eliminating the evacuation or moving it to a voluntary where they were able to come and go. However, if somebody needs to get to a property, there's no guarantee at any given time, obviously based on the fire behavior and the weather. What we recommend is either they can go to the website for the county that has a phone number to call and check and see if they can get an idea whether this is a good day to be able to get back in, or if they come up to one of the roadblock areas, if they're in the area, they can make that inquiry of the person staffing the roadblock. We have a command post within the area dedicated to this fire who is able to track that, and it's not just a matter of yes or no as a blanket. It depends. We check with fire personnel throughout the day. If fire behavior changes and it's moved, they may not be able to get to a place on Thursday they were able to get to on Wednesday because of changes in the fire, but we will make every effort that we can if somebody comes in and they need to get to things. And we certainly understand that. Our goal is to help you get back to normal as much as you can. First, we really want to get people back to their properties when it's safe to do, but in the interim, we could have a situation where you can be let back for a short period of time, or at times we'll escort an individual back in, and we recognize the need to get critical things, certainly medications, vehicles, just prepping homes and things like that. So call, check with us, we'll do everything we can to help you.
Thank you. Next question, is there a high chance that Redfeather and Crystal can go into mandatory evacuations?
Once again, I will take that question. At this point in time, we do not see that as imminent. With that said, we do continue to encourage citizens to be prepared. If the weather were to change and change quickly, that fire could get up and move northeast. We've been very lucky for the folks on the north end in Redfeather and Crystal. So far, the movement in that direction has been minimal maybe, or at least not extensive to the north, but that certainly could change, but we're not seeing it happen immediately. However, we continue to encourage citizens to get their credentials ahead of time, and if you're living up there or you have part-time or vacation property, now's the time to have things prepared to be able to get out. Watch what's going on with the weather. Don't just assume the weather pattern we have now is going to be the weather pattern we have in the next few days.
Thank you. This question is going to be for the Forest Service. Will Redfeather and Crystal Lakes have extra law enforcement for campers starting illegal campfires?
At this time, actually, I'm going to take this question into the map, if that's okay. So I think it's a little bit easier to see. So Redfeather Lakes is kind of down in this area. Crystal Lakes is up here. As you can see, the closure area really encompasses a lot of the places where we have dispersed camping. So keeping the closures in place, part of our reason for doing that is to reduce the number of illegal campfires that are happening right now. We really want to reduce the possibilities for lots of different ways that people could end up in an unsafe situation, and certainly another wildfire starting is definitely one of our concerns right now. So in order to reduce that chance, we're leaving the closure area quite large. There certainly is spots up in the Cherokee Park, Sheep Creek area, down around the Boy Scout Ranch. There certainly are places where people can get in and camp. We and the Sheriff's Department do have folks out on the field patrolling, and we encourage folks to call in fires if they see them. There is a fire ban statewide now, I believe, but there certainly is. We're in stage 2 restrictions on the National Forest, which means there are no open fires allowed on the forest.
I think the sheriff has something to add on this one.
If I could add a follow-up, at this point in time, because we have fairly consistent fire bans or fire restrictions out there, I would encourage citizens to just go ahead and call the sheriff's office, because we staff the 911 center 24 hours a day. And certainly if there's forest resources available, they would respond. But we do have a heavier deputy presence in the area because of the extra patrols we have and some of the evacuation zones, et cetera. So don't hesitate. The easiest way truly at this point probably is to call. Obviously, if you call the Forest Service, they will do what they can. But we've got deputies closer, and we'll certainly look into any reports of fires that are suspected to be not in compliance with the restrictions or bans.
Thank you. The next question, when are the Forest Service and the sheriff going to reduce the closure area to a smaller area? The fire isn't advancing as much as predicted.
This one. So I absolutely get it that the fire has not grown considerably in the last couple of days. And I know that for folks who had plans for the upcoming holiday weekend, for folks who are looking towards their hunting plans, that the size of the closure feels quite large. So I definitely get it, that it feels large compared to the current size of the fire. Our primary goal is to keep everyone safe. That means keeping you, the public, safe, and it means keeping the firefighters safe. In the closure area, especially if you, for example, take a look at our motor vehicle use map, you'll see that there are literally hundreds of routes that crisscross through the entire closure area. And what we tried to do was create an area that was easy to understand and that was also easy for us to control access. We don't want someone to come into the middle of the closure area by having it too small and then accidentally get themselves in a situation that could be dangerous. For those of you who do camp in this area, you know that we have lots of forest roads and also four-wheel drive routes where people can get miles and miles in where someone from the Forest Service or the Sheriff's Department might not be able to find them quickly. So the design behind the closure area isn't necessarily about the immediate edge of the fire and where it is today. It's about where it could be, and it's about where people could access and potentially get themselves into an unsafe situation. So for now, that size is really just trying to continue providing that safety for folks.
And if I could follow up and actually step over to the map and give a little better idea. I can certainly appreciate one of the goals that we have is to get people back in first to their properties. And so as we're looking at those areas, a little bit of an update. The area down here off of Stove Prairie Road, the Buckhorn, and then you can't see it on here, but as we went up Old Flowers Road, that area had been closed off and left in a voluntary evacuation zone recently. We did release that on Sunday, and what we're looking at now, because of that very factor that was proposed here, is we're looking at the Pingree Park campus, Pingree Park Road, all the way back down to Highway 14. And we anticipate if fire behavior and weather remains cooperative, that we hope to get that area opened back up to residents, up through Monument Gulch as well, with the understanding, as conditions change, we may have to move folks back out of there. There will not be a reopening of Crown Point, but as you can see, first of all, there's no private property. That's all within the forest, and that's their area of authority. But we have a lot of private properties through here, so we are addressing that area. Again, it doesn't open up the area to the west for recreation. It just opens up access to private property. We're also having discussions, this roadblock right at Rustic. We've had it there for some period of time. There are some discussions that hopefully before the weekend, we'll be able to move it up a little ways further. One of the areas we've looked at potentially is Poudre Canyon Fire Station number 2. That seems to be just before you get to the Arrowhead Lodge. At least there we're looking at that zone. We think we can get folks up, and that opens up the Poudre City and some of that area. So we hope to be able, now that would be open to residents. We're not looking to bring other folks back into that private property. And then the last place that we're looking at to potentially make some adjustments is when you come over to the west side of the fire, as you come down the Laramie River Valley Road, our stopping point has been up at Four Corners. And with that, that's where 103 and 99 make the loop. And again, we had anticipated the fire was going to move north in a quicker fashion. It hasn't, and they've been able to do a lot of work through the firefighters. So we're working on coming up with something that would be closer down there to Stubb Creek, where 99 and 103, or the Laramie River Valley Road, meet at the bottom end. That would open it up a little bit more. So we are looking at that restriction easing, the restriction around Rustic moving a bit, and again, if it's safe to do, getting residents back up on Pingree Park Road, back up over the top of Pennock Pass into there, and then again, through the Monument Gulch area. So we are continually evaluating, and we do advocate for getting folks back into their property as soon as we can. Again, none of this affects the forest closures, and so people need to understand if those roads are open to residents, it doesn't mean they can or will be back recreated in the forest at this point.
Thank you. And Sheriff, I think you might want to reference the map on this one. There was discussion of moving, and I'm going to try to give this question correctly to you. There was discussion of moving the north containment further south, which I'm going to take a guess that is the closure, and possibly south of 103, 109. Was a decision made to do that?
That was 99 and 103 up here. That's where we're looking to move that to the south end. It'll affect a few residents in the area. I believe it's Rainbow River subdivision. It opens up probably 40-some residences in there. The rest of this is a lot of ranch land up there. We've been working with those ranchers, but that's the area on the west side we look to move down. It will not open up any more recreational access. It really just gets to a few residents in the area.
Thank you. So the next question is from the wolf sanctuary. We evacuated the animals from the wolf sanctuary to the wild animal sanctuary. Sanctuaries near the top of the Wrist Canyon. We're hoping to get some idea on when it would be safe to return. They're somewhat stressed where they are, and going back to our location in Wrist Canyon would help them tremendously, but we don't want to return them and then put them through the stress of moving again. Is there a chance that they can, what's the possibility that they could return?
At this point, there has never been any evacuation of that area where the wolves, and I'm familiar with the wolf sanctuary. That part has never been under a voluntary or mandatory evacuation, so they're certainly free to go back at any point in time, and they need to make their best decision. We've not seen a likelihood of that area being hit early. The only time that we saw a real threat there truly was during the Bluestone fire a little over a week ago, and that one was down kind of near Graves Dairy in the Risk Canyon area. So that was a separate fire, but as soon as we lifted the restrictions the following day on Davis Ranch area and Whale Rock area, that really freed that up. So there really are no restrictions on the wolf sanctuary.
Thank you. What conditions are needed to be met to decrease the mandatory evacuation zone, specifically near Rustic? And I think you covered some of that.
I think we did, and I'll just add to that. We set points up that we refer to as a trigger point. We look in general terms of where the fire is at any given point in time. As it progresses to a certain area, will cause us to look at doing evacuations. But in doing that, it's important to understand that we don't have one specific hard trigger point. Again, this relates back to fire behavior and weather. If the fire is moving slowly in their direction and it hits point A, that would not necessarily cause us to trigger an evacuation. However, if we had more extreme fire behavior, it hit that point going a lot quicker, then obviously we would be much more likely to move folks out of the area. So it's not a black and white, it's a little bit of a gray, but again, we are working at getting folks back up there. And again, it's not been said exactly, but before the weekend, we're hoping to get folks up beyond Rustic a little ways back into some of those residences.
Okay, question. These folks live an eighth of a mile from Arrowhead Lodge. When can they get back to their home?
Thank you. Arrowhead Lodge is in that exact same area. We talked about Poudre Canyon Station 2. We don't have an exact mark. We're continuing to work with fire personnel. We hope to have an announcement in the next day or two and make some of those changes before the weekend. And we do know that folks are looking to get up for recreational or home purposes in those areas. So continue to watch the county webpage, and I will encourage folks who haven't to go to that larimer.org, and there's a link on there for nocoalert.org where they can register their cell phone, any number of devices to get those alerts based on a residence. So if they don't have it, that's the fastest and easiest way to be alerted when these areas change.
Thank you. Question, what number do I call so I can get to my property to retrieve items?
Again, what I would encourage you to do, rather than giving the phone numbers right now, I fear I may give you the wrong phone number, is go to the larimer.org, click on the link for the Cameron Peak Fire, and the phone numbers to call in are going to be in there. We discourage people from calling our dispatch line because that's where we're handling regular calls for service throughout the county. But there's information lines that can give them that, and they can direct them up to other individuals if they need something more specific.
Thank you. Next one's going to be for the Park Service. Do you anticipate lifting the closure in the park anytime soon?
If I could just go to the map and kind of explain a little bit of context on where the closure is in Rocky. So just for context, the purple area here is Rocky Mountain National Park. This is Estes Park. Right down here is Grand Lake, and then this is Trail Ridge Road, Highway 34, that goes across the Continental Divide. And so on August 18th, we implemented this closure order in the far northwest corner of the park. This is primarily quite remote wilderness. There's a number of wilderness campsites and some trails and some backcountry zones in that area. There are no road closures. And so, as you can see, this is the outline of the fire. It's continuing to get chunking slowly toward the park, but getting closer to the park. So we're not looking at removing the closure order at this time. We'll continue to monitor weather conditions and winds and humidity levels, all of those things that will tell us where the fire is going. The other thing about this area, of course, True Ridge Road is, a lot of it is above 12,000 feet. And so much of this area is high elevation in the alpine tundra and not subject to the fire. And so typically this road closes, True Ridge Road closes in mid-October anyway. So we'll just continue to monitor the weather conditions and see if it's possible to lift those closures. We don't have an anticipated date at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is a general question. I believe this probably will go to the Forest Service. Have you worked with Colorado Parks and Wildlife regarding the closure and hunting season?
We have worked with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They are, if you go to their website, they have some information about people that are affected by this fire closure. I know that, guys, I am really aware there's a lot of folks that wait their whole lives for a moose tag in this area. So we were very, very concerned about that when we did enact the closure, and I know that there are a lot of folks that have been waiting decades to get back there in the fall. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has been really great about working with us and supporting this effort. And what they've done is they're offering refunds on some tags that are affected by the closure area, and they have maps and information on their website for that. And then they also are, I believe, offering the opportunity for folks who drew some of those really rare tags, particularly moose tags in the area, to come back next year and use those tags again. So I think their website has a pretty considerable amount of information about that, and they're the best source to get that information, but they have been very cooperative and helpful to us, and also trying to support the hunters who are having their plans disappointed right now.
Thank you. Next question. We've had several in regards to winterizing houses. I know it's been cold up there a few nights. Is there any plans to be able to let folks who are evacuated get in to winterize their property?
Yes, we have been accommodating requests all along the way for individuals. Again, go to the website, it'll give phone numbers to make the call in. You can check ahead of time and get a good idea if it looks like you can get into there. But again, we remind folks that just because you can get in today doesn't mean tomorrow's fire conditions will be the same. But we have been working with citizens to get back to those properties. And at this point in time, truly, other than that section of further up the Poudre Canyon where there is active fire, most other areas we're able to get folks back into. And again, a lot of that's going to be along Pingree Park Road. I know there's a lot of structures, cabins, homes back there. And so encourage them to go to the website, look for phone numbers. If you're not having luck, you can call our main dispatch number and they will connect you up with somebody. That number is 416-1985. They can connect you up if you can't reach somebody else and get you an idea when we can hopefully get you in.
Thank you. Question, everyone mentions trigger points, but should some people pay attention to the map on fire growth to gain an idea of when to evacuate before it becomes mandatory?
I encourage folks to always keep an eye, and that's why all the briefings that go on through the fire team are very helpful for you to get an idea where it's at. What those don't tell you is the potential of where it may or could run, depending on winds and heat that might come in. So one of the things that we're doing is looking to give individuals the best heads up that we can. Again, what we don't want to end up in is the tragic situation that we had in High Park Fire where something happened so quickly that you simply have to tell people to get out now. So by getting the credentialing done ahead of time, really working on these trigger points that we look at and constantly communicating with fire behavior folks and the operations folks with the fire team, we get an idea. What we want to do is give individuals enough time if we have to evacuate that they have that opportunity to get out in an orderly manner. And so that's why we're providing these updates, and the reason some of these closures have been a little bit slower than some folks would like to move, is we were making sure that we were pretty tight in where they were before we sent folks back in.
And we have a question here for the folks that have evacuated and have extra vehicles and boats and things. Is there a place in the county that people can go park extra vehicles and boats?
Unfortunately, we are not able to provide any location like that. The vast majority of folks tend to have friends, neighbors, etc., but the county does not have a lot available.
Thank you. Next question is going to be for the Forest Service. Will any of the campgrounds that are closed reopen this year?
Don't have specific opening dates for the campgrounds yet. There are 12 campgrounds that are affected by the fire closure area. We still have 7 that are open. So if you do have existing recreation.gov reservations, we encourage you to check and make sure what your situation is with those. So for the 7 campgrounds that are still open, those reservations are still valid and folks will be able to come out and use them. For the 12 that are still closed, much like all these other closures, we're really depending on what the fire behavior is. A lot of our campgrounds, their final date's going to be September 20th, and that's a little less than 3 weeks away. So I would say there's a fairly good chance that some of the campgrounds will not be open again this season, but again, that decision has not yet been made.
Thank you. Is there any chance of opening parts of Highway 14 on the west side of the fire?
Everything on the west side is really going to come to the either CDOT and or the folks over in Jackson County. The challenge that we've got right now, as I understand, that fire is still active in the Montgomery Pass area and has the potential, a very strong potential, to move down Highway 14. And so I've not heard of anything, and I wouldn't anticipate until this fire really, the behavior changes and it gets cold and you get snow, that it's likely to change that end either, but that's going to be up to some other folks.
Thank you. Next question is, how is County Road 68C and Manhattan Road?
On both of those roads, it's a good opportunity to point out, we haven't had active fire threatening that area, but what we had along that Manhattan Road were fire crews through the Forest Service doing a significant amount of what we refer to as mitigation work, or preparing that so that it's safer if the fire gets in that direction. So at this point in time, those roads do remain closed. They're still continuing. They've got a lot of that trimmed out. Last I knew, they were continuing with chipping operations. So I don't know when those roads might open back up, but rest assured, when that's safe, when we can make sure it's safe for firefighters and safe for the citizens, it's a priority to be able to get that back open. However, again, the reminder is that the recreational areas of forest land will not be open. And so if somebody uses that, that really is just a way to commute back and forth to from Rustic up to Redfeather Lakes, but not for recreation purposes.
Thank you. And we have a question about the Forest Service closure and a question on why the closure is so large compared to the size of the fire.
So we talked about that a little bit before. The biggest thing is really about the interconnectedness of the roads. There's simply dozens and dozens of roads and trails that interconnect in that area, and those get really remote really, really fast. And when we have resources that are really focused on a number of things like firefighter safety, like working with residents to get them in and out of their homes safely, we simply don't have the manpower to track every single trail at every single time to make sure that folks aren't getting in there and getting themselves in an unsafe situation. So it's really for folks' protection. It's really to make sure that we're not putting anyone in a situation where they are hours away from help and no one knows that they're back there. One other thing I would highlight for many of you who recreate there, you know there's not a lot of cell coverage up in that area. There's little spots, right? We all have our special rock that we know if we stand on and hold our phone up like this. But for the most part, there's no cell coverage back there. So folks that get into that area, you know, if we had a sudden change of weather or the fire behavior significantly changed, we would have no way to contact folks. And we don't want to put anyone in that situation. We want to make sure that even though folks are experiencing the inconvenience of not having their recreation opportunity right now, it's more important to me that they're safe at home at the end of this incident. So I do understand the inconvenience and how large the area is, but I feel really confident that we made those choices with your guys' best interest at heart.
Thank you. That appears that we've asked the questions that were in the chat. Want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We will be planning to have some more of these live chat sessions on different topics. And I'd also like to thank our speakers for coming tonight and taking the time to speak to the community. Thank you.